Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kristen Clawson, and I live and do my pottery here in beautiful Ojai, California.
When and why did you fall in love with this art form?
I was fortunate enough that my mother was a potter, and she called me up one day and asked me if I wanted all of her stuff. And that meant glazed materials, a wheel, a kiln, just everything that you could possibly need. And I said, I don't know, let me go take a class. So I threw one pot, I went back and trimmed that pot, and I had just fallen in love, so I knew yes. So got a truck, hauled everything from Ventura to Ojai, and so that was the beginning of it. And then the other thing is I was just so fortunate to be able to have a class nearby. It was Frank Mozzarella, and I love, love, love his work. And so I was able to take classes from him, and that was probably about 16 years ago, and my kids were young. And I realized that while I was learning, there's just this tactile part of throwing, and then to have this physical form when you're finished, it's so rewarding in itself, but it's important to enjoy the process of the throwing. And I realized that it felt like, to me, like I was smiling from the inside out. It was just so fun, and right from the beginning. Was I good at it? Not at all. It took time. But then, of course, there's that reward to knowing, recognizing that you're learning. And I always say to everybody, hang on to your first pots, because you'll look back and go, oh my gosh, that was terrible. But it's really fun to see the progress.
Is your personality reflected in your art?
I think so. I'm pretty straightforward and simple, and like if we took this piece, pretty straightforward. It's tall and linear, more horizontal, or vertical, I mean. Yeah, so my pieces tend to be more of the natural, simple forms. And that's another thing I love about pottery, is you can do with it as you want, and it definitely reflects your personality.
What do you do when you're not inspired to create?
There's always something to do in my studio, and I'm fortunate enough to have my studio at my house, so I can just walk out there, out my back door. It's kind of an indoor-outdoor space. One wall is all windows, and so I can go out there and the birds are chirping, I have beautiful views, there's greenery all around, so the space itself is beautiful. So that helps. And then for me, it's just kind of like puttering around and maybe even just cleaning, and eventually I'm there sitting at my wheel and ready to go.
What would you tell your younger self?
Enjoy the process and do everything. Just say yes to everything. And don't be afraid to ask questions, because that moves you farther down the road a little bit faster, and maybe in a different direction that you couldn't come up with on your own.
And what are your favorite tools?
My favorite tools are, obviously, since clay, you use your hands, my hands. So that's the number one. And then there's a tool, it's called a rib, and I don't know why. It's a funny name, but it's just this little silver, kind of like an oval shape, and it does so much for me when I'm throwing. So I love my rib, and then sponges. Sponges are so valuable in pottery. Yeah, so it's just super simple. Oh, and then I have a trimming tool, and it's called a bison trimming tool, and I've had it since the beginning of throwing, so about 15 years, but if it drops, it shatters, but it's amazing. But if that ever broke, I think I would cry, because I love that tool. Describe
the best piece of art you've ever created.
Actually, the best piece was actually the worst piece. But I'm going to call it the best piece just because I learned the most from it, and it was a teapot. And when you're making a teapot, You make all the different elements of it and then you put it together. And I named this teapot the Frankenstein pot because the handle was too big, the spout was a little bit off, and I realized this is only a pot only your mom could love, so I gave it to my mom. Unfortunately, every time I went to visit her, I got to see that pot. So when the handle finally broke, I was able to throw it away and get rid of the pot. Honestly, that was like the best piece I ever made.